They said the old man was just there for the photos, his hands too slow for modern steel. Major Bristow scoffed as the engines died again, the sound of failure hanging heavier than the flag outside. Then the stranger lifted a wrench engraved with a faded unit mark, one twist, one breath, and the dead tank stirred as if it remembered its name. Quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back, Q. The hangar smelled like oil and hot dust. Outside, flags snapped in the mild Virginia wind, the sort that carried the sound of a distant parade band rehearsing somewhere across Fort Ridgeway. Inside, a tank sat under a canopy of fluorescent light, still and sullen, a steel giant that refused to wake up. 3 men in clean uniforms hovered over the open engine bay, muttering the kind of jargon that made them sound busy but got nothing done. The lead, Major Bristow, checked his watch for the 5th time. He wasn't sweating, but the air around him seemed to heat with irritation. "It's dead," one of the engineers said. "Starter module's gone." "Starter module's fine," another countered. "We've replaced it twice. Then maybe it just doesn't want to run." Bristow snapped, turning to glare at the quiet figure sitting near the back. Frank Hanlon looked up from his seat. The old mechanic's hands were clasped loosely around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. He wore a faded cap with a patch from a unit that didn't exist anymore, and coveralls that had more history than thread. "Don't mind him," Bristow said to the others. "He's here for show." Command thought it'd be cute to invite a relic. The younger men laughed too quickly, too easily. Frank didn't answer. He just set his cup down the ceramic, giving a small tremor on the metal bench. Silent beat. The sound echoed farther than it should have. "We already ran diagnostics," Bristow went on. 3 systems, no power. If the experts can't get it going, nobody can." Frank reached slowly into his duffel and pulled out a small wrench, old, worn smooth by decades of use. The light hit it just right, glinting off an engraving along the head, 45th Armored. "You planning to fix it with that?" Bristow smirked. Frank gave a soft half-smile. "Just keeping it clean." Laughter rippled through the hangar, sharp as sheet metal. A few of the junior techs shifted uncomfortably. "Try YouTube, old man," someone called out. The line drew another round of chuckles. Even Bristow cracked a grin. It was the kind of moment that burned slow humor turning to humiliation in the quiet that followed. Outside, the flag flapped again. The air changed. Frank turned the wrench in his hand, watching how the light caught its edges. There was no anger in his face, only a kind of stillness, like he'd been here before in 100 other hangars in 100 other mornings, where metal refused to move. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Sometimes the old hands still know where the power hides." Ort's moment number 1. Cold open line. The sound of his voice seemed to settle everyone for a breath. Even Bristow looked uncertain what to say next. From across the bay, Lieutenant Jamie Ward, a young engineer barely out of training, paused mid-note on his clipboard. His gaze lingered on Frank, the way a student might look at a teacher he hadn't realized he needed. Major Jamie said quietly, "Maybe we should let him take a look." Bristow exhaled hard. "Fine. If he wants to get his hands dirty for nostalgia's sake, go ahead. Just don't scratch the paint." Frank didn't move. He didn't need to, not yet. The engines were dead, but the real thing that had seized in this hangar wasn't metal. It was memory. I-rest marker. Still, he thought every machine remembers the man who first made it breathe. Outside, the brass band hit a sour note, and the echo carried through the open doors, like a reminder that even the young Miss A beat now and then. The afternoon light in the admin wing was the color of weak coffee. Lieutenant Jamie Ward stood just inside the half-open door of the base office, listening. The hum of an old rotary phone filled the silence like a secret. He'd seen the way Major Bristow had sneered at Frank that morning, and the memory of it stayed under his skin like grit. He glanced down the hall empty, then dialed a number he wasn't supposed to know. General Ward's office, a clipped voice answered. "Sir, it's Lieutenant Jamie Ward, Maintenance Section," he said quickly. "I need to ask about an old unit mark 45th Armored Serial C91. There was a pause long enough for the hum of the phone to sound like static from another decade. "Repeat that, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir. The engraving's on a wrench owned by a Mr. Frank Hanlon, retired mechanic. The Major said it was nothing but—" The voice on the line shifted, lost its calm. "That's a unit we retired before you were born," the General said. The click of a pen stopped mid-note. "Where did you see that mark?" Jamie swallowed. "On the hangar floor, sir." He called you sir, actually. "Were you ever—" That line hung between them, the guy number 2, half question, half doubt, and the silence that followed felt heavier than reprimand. "Lieutenant." "Stay where you are," the General said. "And for now, don't mention this call to anyone." The line went dead. Jamie stared at the receiver for a long moment, hearing only the slow spin of the rotary dial returning home. Back in the hangar, the tank sat like a monument, shadows stretching across its hull. The crew had dispersed for lunch, leaving only Frank and a few idle tools. Jamie walked in, trying to sound casual. "Mr. Hanlon," he said, mind taking another look. "Maybe the controls, not the engine." Frank raised his eyebrows, but followed. The control panel was a relic of switches and dials, the kind of interface that had muscle memory baked into its brass edges. Jamie leaned close, handing Frank a flashlight. Silent beat. The ceiling light flickered once, dust dancing in the beam. Frank knelt slowly, one knee creaking, the sound soft but sure. "You don't have to," Jamie said. "Son, I've been fixing things that didn't want to be fixed, since before you could spell carburetor." Frank murmured. He brushed a thumb across the worn plate, tracing a faint engrave only he seemed to see. The metal under his hand was cold, stubborn, but not dead. "I rest marker." Still, the metal felt familiar, like it had been waiting for him. Jamie watched Notebook Forgotten as the old man adjusted one lever, then another. He didn't pull or twist, just listened. A soft clunk echoed somewhere deep inside the machine. "There," Frank said quietly. "Hear that?" Jamie frowned. "What is it?" "Memory," Frank said. For the first time, the younger man understood that the story unfolding here wasn't about engines at all. Then the ceiling light flickered again, and the hangar filled with a hum so low it felt like the floor itself was remembering. Mini-Cliff. Then everything in the hangar went still but his heartbeat. Rain started in the late afternoon, soft at first, then steadier, and even patter against the hangar roof that turned the air metallic. Inside, the smell of fuel and damp concrete pressed close. The crew stood in small clusters, muttering about the project's failure, their words breaking against the rhythm of the rain. Major Bristow slammed a folder on the workbench. "We're done. Command wants results, not nostalgia. Pull the power line. We're closing this mess by 5. Across the room, Jamie Ward caught the flicker of hurt that crossed Frank Hanlon's face. The old mechanic just nodded once, like he'd been dismissed from harder places. Jamie hesitated, then stepped forward. "Sir, give him one more shot," he said. "He's seen things in these systems we don't even recognize." "Lieutenant, this isn't a museum," Bristow snapped. "We've already wasted a week." It's not wasted if it runs, Jamie said quietly. And it hasn't since we stopped listening. The words landed heavier than intended. Bristow stared at him a moment, then exhaled hard. Fine. 10 minutes. After that, it's scrap. Frank moved toward the tank like a man returning to an old hymn. The others cleared space. He laid the blueprints across a rolling stool, squinting through the years at lines that didn't look right. They rewired it for digital control, he murmured. That's the problem. Jamie leaned closer. You can see that without instruments. Son, sometimes you just listen. Bridge moment. Jamie lifted his phone recording as Frank traced the wiring on the page with his fingertip, murmuring to himself. He's reading the machine like a book, Jamie whispered. Frank smiled faintly. Books don't hum when you get the words right. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, a single overhead bulb flickered. The light trembled on the old wrench in Frank's hand, the same one with 45th Armored etched into its head. That mark, Jamie said. What's it mean really means we kept things alive, Frank said, even when nobody thought they could be. He adjusted one lever, then another. Sparks of light blinked across the control board, not the angry flash of failure, but a slow pulse like a heart remembering how to beat. Silent beat. The rain softened. Frank exhaled, shoulders low, listening. The hum of the base radio filled the gap between thunder and breath. Come on, Jamie whispered. Come on, old boy. Frank twisted a final knob. The tank coughed once, then again, metal shivering with effort. For a second, it almost came alive. Then the sound died, leaving only the hum of the rain. Frank rested both hands on the panel. The air was still enough to hear the tick of a cooling wire. Minicliff, and then, faintly, the past began to hum. Jamie met his eyes. Neither spoke. Outside, lightning flickered white against the hangar doors, and for an instant, both of them looked younger, one seeing the future, the other remembering it. The storm had passed by morning. Sunlight poured through the high hangar windows in long gold bars that made the dust look almost holy. The tank gleamed where the rain had washed the grime from its flanks. A convoy of sedans stopped outside. Boots clicked on concrete. General Ward stepped in gray hair, crisp uniform, eyes sharp enough to cut through protocol. The crew froze. Major Bristow went rigid, the clipboard in his hand suddenly too small. At ease, the general said. His tone was quiet, but it carried. The crowd parted without being told. For the first time since the project began, nobody spoke. Bristow tried to explain, but his words tripped over themselves. He could feel every eye turning every rank higher than his in one gaze. He was slammed by the spotlight, bound by expectation more than regulation. Frank Hanlon stood beside the tank coveralls streaked with graphite. He looked smaller in the light and steadier. We still trust your hands, General Ward said, offering a brief salute. Frank nodded once. Then let's listen to the machine. He gestured for silence. Every sound, the ticking of tools, the shuffling of boots fell away. He set his coffee cup aside and took up the old wrench, the one engraved 45th Armored. Its handle caught the sun like a metal worn thin. He moved without rush, checking bolts, tracing cables the way a preacher might trace verses. Then, with one small twist, he tightened the final fitting. Sem-lock evidence. He was pinned by the moment. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Frank stepped back, hand hovering above the ignition switch. Ready, proceed, Ward said. Frank pressed the button. A deep mechanical cough rolled through the hangar, then another rougher but stronger. Panels shook, gauges blinked. He leaned forward, steady as a conductor, and turned the final lever. evidence. He fired the system back to life. The engine roared not violently, but like an anthem remembered. Heat shimmered from the vents. The whole structure vibrated with reborn discipline. Power wasn't the problem, patience was, Frank said. Orts, moment number 2. Shock rippled first, then awe. Men who'd mocked him an hour ago found themselves clapping without realizing it. Jamie Ward's grin broke through the engine noise. His phone trembled as he caught every second on video. Major Bristow looked around, lost for words. The general's gaze softened. Sometimes it takes an old soldier to remind us what service sounds like. Frank didn't answer. He simply rested the wrench on the tank's hull and let the engine idle, steady, confident, alive. Sunlight washed across his face, deepening the lines that time had drawn there. Symbolic meaning. The restart wasn't about machinery. It was moral restoration, proof that patience still outlasts protocol. The crowd exhaled as one. Someone opened the hangar doors, letting the warm air roll in. Outside, the flag snapped again in perfect rhythm with the engine's hum. The mess hall always smelled like coffee that had been waiting too long, but that afternoon it was different. Warmer, almost proud. The sun leaned in through the long windows, laying gold stripes across the tables. Somewhere in the back, a radio hummed out an old country tune, the kind of song that remembered more than it said. At one of the tables sat Frank Hanlon, hat set beside his tray, steam rising from his cup. Across from him, Major Bristow shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable in the role of visitor. Mr. Hanlon Bristow began, voice tight but steady. "Owe you an apology. I misjudged your methods and your patience." Frank stirred his coffee with the handle of his spoon, listening. "It's not the first time I've been underestimated," he said softly. "And it won't be the last." Bristow gave a faint nod, eyes low. "You brought that machine back to life. You reminded all of us what this place stands for." "Machines don't die," Frank said. "They just wait for the right hands." There was a pause, the kind of silence that isn't awkward but earned. A waitress passed by, refilling cups. Frank dropped a couple of bills on the counter, tipped her quietly, then leaned back. "Guess the old parts still work," he said with a wry smile. Humor light, coffee warm, neighborly. Jamie Ward came in from the hangar, still a little dazed from the day's events. In his hand was the wrench, freshly polished, the engraved letters, 45th Armored, catching the afternoon light. He set it on the counter beside Frank's cup. "Thought you might want to keep this close," Jamie said. Frank studied it for a long moment. "You keep it," he said finally. "That wrench doesn't belong to me anymore." Jamie hesitated. "Sir, you'll understand when you've fixed something everyone else gave up on," Frank said. "That's when you earn the right to carry it." From a nearby table, someone unfolded the local paper. A headline barely half a page read, "Restarting Respect, WWII. Mechanic revives Fort Ridgeway's pride." Laughter and light conversation rippled through the room. Someone clapped Frank on the shoulder as they passed, and Bristow, awkward but sincere, followed suit. "They'll probably put that headline on the baseboard," Bristow said. "Public Affairs loves a redemption story." Frank chuckled. "Let's hope they spell my name right." Community echo, the story already spreading beyond the hangar. The fan above turned lazily, stirring the smell of grease and coffee and warm air. Silent beat. Frank looked toward the window where sunlight lingered on the sill, then back to the wrench gleaming beside Jamie's hand. "Take care of it," he said again, voice low. Jamie nodded, eyes steady. "Yes, sir." Frank sipped the last of his coffee. Outside, the faint hum of the tank's idling engine carried on the wind, a gentle reminder that patience could move steel and sometimes people, too. The new museum wing at Fort Ridgeway smelled of fresh paint and polished metal. Outside, the evening sun dropped low, washing the glass panels in gold. Inside, the crowd gathered around the freshly restored tank, the same one that had refused to start, until an old mechanic taught it how to remember. Jamie Ward adjusted his tie nerves and pride mixed in equal measure. Frank Hanlon stood quietly beside him, coat pressed, cap in hand. The low hum of the air conditioning sounded almost like the engine's idle, steady, familiar alive. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamie began today. We dedicate this exhibit not to machines, but to the people who gave them purpose. He nodded toward Frank. This plaque is for the man who showed us that power isn't about force or youth, it's about patience and care. He read the engraving aloud. To the mechanic who knew where the power really was. A small ripple of applause filled the hall. Flashbulbs popped. The General Bristow and a handful of younger soldiers stood in the back hats, off eyes, thoughtful. Frank shifted slightly uncomfortable in the spotlight. You didn't have to do all this, he murmured to Jamie. We did, Jamie said. You restarted more than an engine, sir. Frank smiled faintly. Engines only sleep. It's people who forget how to listen. Jamie laughed softly. Guess we just needed the right teacher. Prop legacy. The wrench still engraved 45th Armored rested in a glass case beside the tank, its steel head reflecting the soft orange of sunset. Beneath it a small plaque read simply, "The tool that restarted history." Guests filtered through, pointing, whispering, taking photos. A veteran in the corner dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. The hum of conversation faded into the low thrum of memory. Silent beat. Frank leaned on his cane eyes on the glass. For a moment, his reflection merged with the tank's polished side, old and new, sharing the same outline. The light trembled, and the sound of an idling engine seemed to pulse beneath the floor, quiet and rhythmic. Jamie stepped closer. You know, we call this section the quiet restart now, he said. Frank's eyebrows lifted. Nice name. You came up with that. Not really, Jamie replied. You did. Frank chuckled, shaking his head. Didn't even know I said it. You didn't, Jamie said. You lived it. The crowd began to drift toward the exit, but the two of them stayed by the glass case, watching the reflection fade into the deepening orange outside. Replay trigger. 15 words. The quiet ones keep the world turning. The last light touched the stars on the flagpole outside. The flag stirred once gently, as if answering. The museum lights dimmed, leaving only the soft glow of the tank's panel alive in stillness, patient in legacy. A voiceover could almost be heard over the image, low and warm. If this story moved you, share it forward. Closing image. Outside, the flag swayed against a golden sky. Inside, behind the glass, the faint hum of the restored engine held steady proof that power once remembered never really dies. The museum lights dimmed as the last guests left, and Frank stayed a moment longer, watching sunlight fade across the tank's steel. Still, the air carried that steady hum, the same one that had outlasted storms, orders, and time. On the glass beside the display case, his reflection touched the engraved words. To the mechanic who knew where the power really was. Quietly, he smiled. The wrench gleamed like a medal no one asked for proof enough.